でも今じゃそんなこと忘れて何かから逃げるように毎日見過ごしてた景色は億千万億千万突き去りしきさずはグラビティ君がくれた勇気は億千万億千万過ぎ去りし季節はもうドラマティー。
Greetings, friends. Buzzsaw the Righteous here, and I bet you're wondering why I'm in such a rotten mood right now. Well, let me tell you something. I'm mad. I'm angry. I'm furious. I'm enraged. And don't you tell me to let it go and just deal with it. I want satisfaction. I want to get even. I want recompense. I want retribution. You know what I want? I want you to watch this video all about the power of anger and the thing that comes after should you just nurture it and leave it unshackled. So, power on, everybody. Or else. Bad things often happen in life, and from that, a mixed bag of emotions are often expressed in various ways. Some get annoyed, others feel sorrow, but no emotion is more expressive than wrath or anger. Often anger dissipates over time, but what if the bad thing that happens is an injustice that befalls you or a loved one? The anger is ever more greater in that instance, and in the absence of justice, it often leads to one end goal. Revenge. So here, I'm going to talk about 10 of the most destructive of video game characters that seek that sweet, sweet revenge. But what do I mean by destructive revenge? By that I mean the kind of revenge that, while focused on one person or party, often victimizes themselves or other people in the process, especially innocents. As a result, other than the usual one per franchise rule, as well as a major spoiler warning, I'm not including characters whose path to vengeance isn't particularly reckless per se. And fighting characters are pretty subjective and difficult to figure out, so they're off the list too. Which means Scorpion from Mortal Kombat is not on the list. What? Whoa. Don't be so angry. I swear this will be a good list. Pinky promise. Best way to start this list is a cautionary tale about how even a well-known protagonist can be blinded by vengeful rage. Let's dive into Resident Evil 6. Oh, knock it off! I have my reasons! I just... Bah! Yes, I know, it is a bad game and people hate it. Though I still maintain that Survivor was the worst. And yes, the story is badly fragmented and confusing at times, but when you do take the time to make sense of it without trying to figure out an overall timeline, it can be at least a bit compelling, particularly in the case of Chris Redfield's campaign. At the start, Chris is found drunk in a bar with a case of... amnesia. He is pulled back into active duty, and while trying to quell an outbreak in China, slowly remembers what happened 6 months prior. During a different mission, he loses some of his men to the C virus after a chance encounter with a woman claiming to be Ada Wong, which led to his amnesia, and once the memories come back, that's when the rage starts boiling.
It's on now, girlfriend!
During his pursuit of Ada, he runs afoul of a group of zombies as well as a giant snake. And though he seems dedicated to his mission, it is quite clear he is not thinking straight and inadvertently gets almost his entire team killed, leaving only him and Piers. Piers calls him out on that, and upon running into Leon later on, finally calms down and focuses on apprehending Ada as opposed to wanting to kill her, though he pretty much loses the chance to do either or later on. I give kudos to Chris for collecting himself before things got worse, though considerable damage had already been done at that point. When revenge is on the mind and it seems you're focused on nothing else, often people around you pay the price. And Chris Redfield definitely proved there's no exception to the rule. Time to venture into unknown territory once more, right into the world of Dragon Age Origins. The Dragon Age series prides itself upon the option of player choice. Characters join you, reject you, and storylines often enter into major deviations, all because of one or two simple choices you make within the game. And such choices become pivotal in the case of the fate of Zathrian. In the quest called Nature of the Beast, the Grey Wardens happen upon a tribe of Dalish elves led by their keeper Zathrian and try to ask for their help in defeating the Darkspawn. Unfortunately, they have problems of their own in the form of werewolves attacking their tribe and either outright killing them or turning them into bloodthirsty beasts. Zathrian asks for your help in dispelling the werewolf curse by hunting down the beast called Witherfang and taking its heart back to him to create a cure. Further into the quest, however, we learn that the werewolves are rather intelligent and Witherfang is a spirit of the forest who drops a major bombshell. Zathrian is the one who started the curse!
Whoa, didn't see that coming.
Centuries before, a tribe of humans murdered his son and raped his daughter, leaving her for dead. And in a powerful fit of vengeful grief, he binds Witherfang to the spirit of the forest and sets it against the humans, killing them and giving birth to the curse that rages today. I doubt, though, that he expected the werewolves to return and attack his people centuries later. At this point is where the player choice comes in. You can kill the werewolves and save the Dalish, or side with the werewolves and kill Zathrian and the entire camp, all of which gains you allies in the fight against the Darkspawn, but I always find the third choice is the most satisfying one. You can bring Zathrian to meet the Lady of the Forest, though he initially refuses to remove the curse, as the deaths of his children remain fresh on his mind. After a short battle with him, however, he changes his mind and undoes the curse, at the cost of both his and the lady's lives. The werewolves return to human form as a result, and you eventually gain the Dalish elves' assistance against the Darkspawn. Zathrian is a good example of how our choices define what happens around us. When we choose vengeance, we get trapped in a never-ending cycle of anger and hatred. Only when we make the right choices can that cycle be broken. Now that's something to ponder. We're back to Persona 5 again? Yep, you'll notice a return to certain franchises in these lists, and Persona 5 is no exception. After all, many of the bosses are living embodiments of the 7 deadly sins, but strangely enough, there doesn't seem to be a boss symbolic of the sin of anger and vengeance. Actually, if you look closer, there is, and it's from someone you both expect and yet not expect at the same time. You with me with this?
I get it. I don't get it.
Okay, let me explain. At some point in the game, you soon meet Goro Akechi, a high school student and self-styled ace detective who takes it upon himself to discredit the Phantom Thieves and bring them to justice. When things heat up and the Phantom Thieves are accused of murder, Akechi learns of their identities and surprisingly offers to help them out, joining them in at least one mission. That mission, however, seemingly gets shot to heck and Joker is arrested. TLDR, Akechi betrayed the group.
Oh, there's a big surprise!
He is secretly working for the corrupt politician Masayoshi Shido and is also responsible for various mental shutdowns and deaths throughout the game, including Futaba's mother, the Shujin Academy principal, and Kunikazu Okumura, among other things. What one doesn't expect is, while he does this at the behest of Shido, he's also doing this for revenge against Shido, helping him get to the top of the political world only to bring him down by telling the world that Akechi is Shido's illegitimate son! Growing up lonely after the suicide of his mother and finding out his father abandoned him, Akechi then sets upon his quest of destructive vengeance. And as evidence when confronted by the Phantom Thieves in Shido's cognitive world, he didn't care at all about the lives he's destroyed getting there, and seemingly doesn't care about killing them with every ounce of psychotic rage he can muster. But after his defeat, he learns how the party truly feels about him, and that Shido always knew the truth about him and was going to get rid of him anyway. And in a last-minute act of redemption, he helps the Phantom Thieves escape, sacrificing his own life to keep the shadows at bay. Like with Zathrian, he made a lot of life-destroying choices, but at least made the right choice in the end. And then Persona 5 Royal just came out. I just finished Persona 5, and now there's a whole other new version to consider? Well, from what I read, it didn't really add anything to Akechi's revenge story, and he may have survived at the end of the game, so really, there's not much to add here, so we'll just leave it at that. As of this video, I still have yet to enter the indie scene. Over the last decade and a half, indie games have really exploded into prominence, giving us great games like Shantae, Cave Story, Five Nights at Freddy's, and let's not forget Undertale. Some are quirky, some get you thinking, and some I probably won't touch with a 40-foot pole, and all have compelling storylines and relatable characters, including a nice little Metroidvania called Iconoclasts. Much thanks to Killshot Archer for pointing this out to me. While the storyline is rather engaging, it is also rather hard to follow along. Basically, it involves a world state ruled by a hyper-religious cult, a strange liquid called ivory, an environmental apocalypse, giant space worms, and apparently fixing things without a license is a religious heresy and abomination? Say what now?
I say to you now, turn from your wicked ways. Thou shalt not turn the screw of wickedness, but thou shalt turn the screw of righteousness, and ye shall find salvation.
Useless fact, Wrench is a raging atheist. But it's the characters and overall narrative that really make the game, particularly a tragic antagonist named Agent Black. It's safe to say Agent Black is not a happy person to begin with, seeing as how she's lived almost 200 years with heavy cybernetic arms and a never-ending headache. Almost like she's the love child of Jax and Rita Repulsa. Things get worse for her when one of her fellow agents, whom is probably the only person she can get along with, is murdered by Elro, the brother of the protagonist Robin. Though she remains by the book, she loses patience more and more with her superiors as she comes close to achieving her vengeance. And after one last moment where she rips off Elro's arm, she is stopped once more. This becomes the tipping point for her as she proceeds to beat the living heck out of her peers and even kills fellow soldiers. She then proceeds to torment Robin and her companion Royal, her obsession with finding Elro consuming her to the point of her transforming into a hideous abomination of destruction. And we all know where that road leads. Though, despite her being something of a bad person, you also can't help but feel sorry for her. She had lost someone who was close to her and never found time to properly grieve her loss, which I found to be the underlying theme of the game. It can be hard to cope with the loss of a loved one, but bottling up that anger is like holding a bottle of nitroglycerin while jogging. And when you trip, it affects everyone. In the previous entry, we saw how Agent Black became who she is, but it is never explained why. We're only led to assume that a past trauma led to her decision to becoming a near-immortal cyborg, and her character development throughout the game allowed us to empathize with her plight. Though Agent Black never had her whole brain forcefully placed into a computer, now did she?
Oh, it's you.
You know her?
It's been a long time.
I swear, people on the internet has talked about the Portal series more times than the angry video game nerd said the F word. Okay, maybe not that much, but there's no denying the major impact that Portal has left upon the gaming community, with its complex puzzles and equally complex characters. Specifically, my number 6 pick, Gladys. From the outset of Portal 1, Gladys seems like a supportive, disembodied computer voice. But as the game rolls on, her speech becomes more erratic and psychotic, and upon completing the last test, she outright tries to kill you. After escaping and going to confront Gladys, you realize why you seem to be the only test subject here. Gladys previously killed everyone at Aperture Labs with deadly neurotoxin. But why? The sequel reveals in subsequent conversations with Gladys, as well as old pre-recorded messages, that Gladys was once Carolyn, the assistant of Aperture Labs CEO Cave Johnson. After being poisoned by moon rocks and in the throes of insanity in his last days, Cave Johnson pretty much orders his engineers to place Carolyn's brain in a computer, whether she likes it or not.
Now she'll argue. She'll say she can't. She's modest like that, but you make her. Hell, put her in my computer, I don't care.
Upon activation, she immediately starts killing everyone with neurotoxin, and from what I've heard, it is not a good way to die. They shut her down in time and attach a bunch of cores as well as a morality core in order to pacify her. But that proves ineffective as she resumes gassing everyone till everyone is dead. Safe to say, if Carolyn and Gladys is indeed one and the same, her actions were nothing short of vengeful, albeit subconsciously. And like Agent Black, despite being this sadistic, crazed AI filled with ingrained rage, I still can't help but feel sorry for her. She had her humanity stripped away forcefully, and I know I'd be mad and wanting some payback if that happened to me. Of course, testing Chell and other possible human test subjects to death while constantly hurling insults is supreme overkill, especially considering she already avenged herself years before. Man, I think I'll pass on the cake. The Metal Gear series has always had an intriguing, overarching storyline, and you can certainly find a few revenge stories in the mix. Naomi's revenge against Snake in the original Metal Gear Solid is a good one, and Metal Gear Rising basically has revenge in its name. But I think I'll go with the games where the theme itself is all about revenge. And yes, I meant games, in the plural. Metal Gear Solid 5, Ground Zeroes, and the Phantom Pain. Both of them. And though only the Phantom Pain is all about revenge, and believe me, Big Boss and the Diamond Dog's tale of revenge is worth telling despite how it all turns out, both games do a pretty good job laying out the case of Skullface.
Are you kidding me? Are you out of your mind?
Okay, before you all go angry mob on me for my choice, please note that I'm looking for revenge that is destructive. And compared to Big Boss and others, Skullface's path to vengeance is exceedingly destructive. Basically, Skullface is out to avenge his... get ready for this. His lost culture. Confusing, I know, but listen. Throughout his life, Skullface was forced to adapt to various languages, to the point where he had forgotten his own native language. And an explosion at a rapeseed oil plant caused him to be doused in boiling oil, among other injuries leading to his massive scarring. All this, coupled with being tortured by foreign hands after his said accident, left him with a fiery anger towards anyone he blamed for taking away his native tongue, including his commanding officer Major Zero and Big Boss. This leads to a complicated series of plots involving a new Metal Gear, a deadly parasite that affects people with certain languages, and, oh look, is that Colonel Volgan? He even experimented on children. I repeat, on children. Big Boss and his men become victims of assassinations and biological attack as well, all culminating in a destructive final showdown with Skullface, leading to his death and satisfying their own lust for vengeance. Just using children for his revenge plot alone is enough to clinch the number 5 spot, but if that's not enough for you, need I remind you of Ground Zeroes and what he did to Paz? No matter how many times I see that scene, I could see that scene 100 times over, and it would still turn my stomach. Need I say more? Like with Persona 5, we're going back to the world of Dead Rising. This time around, though, we're going to look at the first entry in the series, the very game that started it all, and the first appearance of the one and only Frank West. Our famous zombie-killing photojournalist descends upon the town of Willamette, Colorado, where he covers the zombie outbreak that was taking place and finds himself entangled in a web of conspiracy involving government secrets and the instigator of the zombie outbreak, Carlito Keys. Carlito and his sister Isabella were once residents of the peaceful Central American town of Santa Cabeza. Peaceful, that is, until the US government's secret experiments with zombie-making insects goes awry and essentially zombifies the entire town, leading the government to step in and burn everything to cover it all up. Carlito and Isabella escape and soon decides to avenge their lost loved ones by releasing the same insects into the United States, starting with Willamette. It's by then that Carlito is overtaken by his own psychotic rage, making trouble for Frank and his comrades to ensure everything goes his way, and prompting Isabella to seek Frank's help in stopping him. After a series of mishaps, Carlito is mortally wounded and tells his story to Frank, essentially telling him that Americans filling their bellies with genetically produced meat is apparently more important to them than the preservation of human life.
Using zombie bees to make ground beef faster? That'd make me want to go vegan. Heck, I'll graze the same grass that my cows eat.
Like with Gladys and Skullface, Carlito had everything taken away from him. And like with Goro Akechi, it shows how even the most ordinary of people can be driven to a vengeful bloodlust. Something interesting to note is, somewhere in the game, Isabella learns that Carlito may have infected over 50 orphans with a suppressed version of the virus and sent them all over the country. Sounds pretty ominous on the surface, but there's also a flip side. In Dead Rising 3, the protagonist Nick is believed to be one of those orphans, yet he is completely immune to the zombie virus, with Isabella revealing that while her brother wanted revenge, he also didn't want the virus to be uncurable. Huh. I guess even homegrown terrorists can have that small streak of conscience every now and again. Turning from a revenge plot involving zombies, we now turn to another horror franchise with a revenge story as old as time itself, Castlevania. For over a millennia, the Belmonts and others have fought the good fight against Count Dracula, but let's go back to the very beginning. And no, I'm not talking about Castlevania Legends. That was retconned. Nope, we're going back to Castlevania Lament of Innocence, the story about two crusaders named Leon Belmont and Matthias Cronquist. In a story that eerily parallels the Bram Stoker novel, Matthias loses his wife Elizabetha to illness and, in his grief, formulates a plan to acquire a powerful Crimson Stone and direct his friend Leon Belmont into killing an evil vampire. By taking the vampire's soul upon defeat, he becomes immortal himself in a bid to gain revenge against God. He blames God for taking away his wife and was willing to make people like Ronaldo, Leon, and his wife Sarah suffer for the sake of immortality and cursing God forever. He escapes and the millennia-long fight begins, but that's not when the real revenge begins. 400 years later, he resurfaces, having taken the name of Count Dracula, and he soon falls in love with a village healer named Lisa. They marry and even bear a son, who would later be known as Alucard, but sadly, Dracula's newfound happiness would be short-lived. Villagers saw Lisa's abilities as a doctor as a form of witchcraft, and they proceed to burn her at the stake. And true to form, Dracula goes over the edge. He switches from hating God to seeking revenge against all of humanity, leading to many centuries of terrorizing the Romanian countryside with monsters of varying degrees. Not to mention the suffering of many notable characters. Sypha, Grant, Hector, Soliu, Richter, Eric, just to name a few. It wouldn't be until Aria of Sorrow and its direct sequel, Dawn of Sorrow, where the series comes to its possible inevitable conclusion. The main protagonist, Soma Cruz, is revealed to be a new incarnation of Dracula, but decides to fight against the chaos that is the source of Dracula's dark power. And though there were a couple of instances where that chaos nearly had reawakened and revived Dracula to full power, the friends he made, along with his girlfriend Mina Hakuba, help him fight back and eventually overcome the chaotic power. This apparently ends Dracula's quest for vengeance in yet another subtle nod to the Bram Stoker novels, which goes to show that even a classic literary spin on a well-known gaming franchise can lead to a good outcome. Well, until Konami starts caring about it again, that is. I bet you're pretty miffed that I didn't include Scorpion for Mortal Kombat on the list, seeing as how he's the go-to obvious poster child for revenge in video games. Which is true, but all in all, his revenge quest isn't particularly destructive in my opinion. And no, fatalities don't count. There's also Travis Touchdown from No More Heroes 2, as well as Asura from Asura's Wrath to consider as well. And while I found Travis to be destructive, really, in the grand scheme of things, he would have killed all those assassins anyway to satisfy his 5-point boner. As for Asura, while his rampage is the stuff of legends, he wasn't focused solely on revenge, and he took great care in not hurting any innocents along the way. All are classic examples of vengeance in video games that sadly didn't make my list for the reasons I've mentioned. But hey, if you really want a classic, well-known, vengeful video game character worthy of this list, well, here you go.
You will not see the end of this day. I will have my revenge!
Finally! Yes! Thank you!
Oh, come on. Did you really think I'd leave Kratos off of this list? Of all the characters I've mentioned, whether they made the list or not, Kratos is indeed the most explicitly destructive of all. Everyone knows the story by now. Kratos serves the Greek god of war Ares, and in a bid to make him the perfect warrior, Ares afflicts Kratos with a rage, causing him to kill his fellow Spartans, including his wife and child. He seeks revenge and ultimately kills Ares and becomes a new god of war, though he still has nightmares of his unwilling misdeeds. Later, it is revealed that Kratos is the son of the king of the gods Zeus, and fearing his son's increasing power, decides to kill his son and send him to the underworld. But Kratos is not one to stay dead for long, and so he fights his way out of the underworld, goes back in time, changes his fate, goes back in time again, enlists the Titans to his aid, and returns to the present to lead the assault against Zeus and the gods. All of this leads into God of War 3, where, you know... Yep, pretty much that. And true to form, Kratos proceeds to kill almost the entire pantheon of gods, and just about anyone else who gets in his way, all in a massive blood-soaked campaign of vengeful carnage. Most notably, as Kratos kills off the gods one by one, their resulting deaths lead to massive consequences for the people of Greece, leading to massive floods, plagues of locusts, the death of plant life, and so on. And of course, Kratos doesn't care. Up to a point, all he's focused on is punching his dad to death until he's nothing more than pita meat. Then, upon surveying the destruction he had caused, Kratos declares his vengeance has ended and proceeds to take his own life. But like I said before, Kratos doesn't stay dead for long, and has left Greece behind for the world of Norse mythology. Now raising a son named Atreus, it isn't long before trouble starts brewing again, and once again the old Spartan rage comes a-knockin', and it is shown that Atreus has inherited some of that rage as well. With how much damage and suffering Kratos has caused, it goes to show that you can sometimes never run from your past, and it seems the sins of the father will visit upon the son one day. Ragnarok's coming soon, my friends. By all accounts, Kratos should be number one. After all, his revenge against the gods couldn't compare to a lot of other revenge stories in video games, at least in grand scale. Revenge isn't always just about the body count, though. There is also the emotional impact. When vengeance is achieved or not, what happens to the person? Quite a few entries on this list don't get to move on, as they get killed trying to achieve their goals, while others like Chris Redfield and Kratos manage to move on, though their stories are still being told. All of which have emotional impact, but not quite like my pick for number one, which after much deliberation offers more emotion to a tale of revenge than the previous 9 in my opinion. And this pick comes from a very recent game, so here's the spoiler warning again, just to remind you of what's coming. Okay? Are we clear? All right then. Ladies and gentlemen, Ellie. The Last of Us is a survival horror game that takes place in a post-apocalyptic Earth, with the main protagonist being a man named Joel Miller. Joel is tasked with escorting a young girl named Ellie across the zombie-torn United States, and upon reaching their goal is hit with a bombshell. Ellie is immune to the effects of toxic spores that causes zombification, and in order to reverse engineer a cure, Ellie has to die. And as you can imagine, Joel, having lost his daughter years before and having grown close to Ellie, is very unwilling to leave her to her fate. He proceeds to rescue her and kill the doctors operating on her and anyone else in his way on the way out. And afterwards, when she regains consciousness, is pretty much lied to by Joel, telling her that they stopped looking for a cure and that there were others. As you can imagine, this pretty much sets up the sequel that comes out 7 years later, and we finally see the repercussions of Joel's actions.
Now, I want to remind you all that there are major spoilers incoming for the sequel to The Last of Us, and if you hadn't played it yet, you've been duly and explicitly warned. Now, I'm just doing this out of self-preservation here. I don't want any rabid fans coming to my door and... You see what I mean?
Taking place in a 5-year time frame from the events of the last game, Ellie slowly comes to realize what Joel has done and that he lied to her, and they have a sort of a falling out. And just when Ellie is considering the idea of forgiving Joel, he is suddenly captured and beaten to death by a group of kids led by the mysterious Abby, who is an apparent member of a group called the WLF, and oh yeah, she's also the daughter of one of the doctors that Joel killed.
Dun, dun, dun.
While Abby achieves her revenge goal, all of this is done in front of Ellie's unblinking eyes, traumatizing her and filling her with rage to the point where she is willing to go it alone, against a large, well-armed militia group, mind you, to kill Abby and avenge Joel. One by one, she takes out almost every member of the WLF, and as the game rolls on, we see just how much her bloodlust and blinding anger affects her. And despite a couple of moments where she is mortified at the deaths she leaves behind, especially when one of her victims is revealed to be pregnant, she still presses on, her mind still on revenge. Ellie finally catches up with Abby, but is beaten senseless, and her friends accompanying her are either killed or injured, and she is told never to come near her again. A year later, it seems she has moved on, though she still suffers crippling nightmares of Joel's death, and she soon learns where Abby has gone next. Despite the pleas of her partner Dina to stay and forget about her quest of vengeance, she once again sets out to settle the score once and for all. She finds Abby and demands one final fight, to the point where she holds a knife to a child's throat to force her to choose. The fight is brutal, and even though Ellie loses a couple of fingers in the process, she gains the upper hand and is close to achieving her goal. And then she just stops. We're left guessing as to why Ellie suddenly relents, but judging from the look of pure anguish on her face as she begins to let go, it does not come easy for her. As I've said before, not every entry on this list gets to live on. Skullface and Agent Black die trying to achieve their goals to the bitter end. Zathrian, Akechi, and Carlito also die but make the right choices in the end. GLaDOS is already dead and has avenged herself, though lives forever in a machine, and in some way, shape, or form, Chris Redfield, Kratos, and even Dracula through Soma Cruz get to live on and move on with their lives, the road to uncertainty lying ahead for them. All have something of an emotional payoff, but in Ellie's case, you feel more raw emotion here than any of the revenge stories on this list. All of it culminates in this last scene in The Last of Us 2. Ellie returns home, her mission a failure, and Dina and her child having left her alone. Walking around in an empty house with only memories of Joel to comfort her, she leaves her guitar, the last gift Joel left to her, behind, her future uncertain as she walks away. The feeling of loneliness and emptiness reverberates throughout this scene, and in a story about revenge and reckless death, once the anger abates, emptiness is all she is left with, and we're all left wondering, where does she go from here? Where do we all go from here?
My name is Buzzsaw the Righteous, and, after such a rage-filled video, I feel a lot better. I guess it just goes to show you how one must let their anger go before it overtakes them, because revenge really isn't all that satisfying. Never forget, but always strive to forgive, no matter how hard it can be. If nothing else, do it for your own sake.
Thanks for watching, and until we meet again, look sharp and stay righteous.
Shadow of death, and I fear no evil, because I'm blind to it all. In my mind, my gun, they comfort me, because I know I'll kill my enemies when they come. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell on this earth forevermore. Said I walk beside the still waters, and they restore my soul, but I can't walk on the path of the right, because I'm wrong. Well, I came upon a man at the top of a hill, called himself the savior of the human